Weird. Okay. So what I want to do while everybody's still hopping on is kind of go through a very, very nutshell synopsis of these first two limbs of yoga. The ethical precepts is one way to kind of view them. Essentially, it's our philosophical guiding principles in the world of yoga. The yamas being, in a nutshell, the way we engage with the world, and the niyamas being essentially the way we engage with ourselves, or the way we treat the world and the way we treat ourselves. But it's that engagement and the concepts that the world of yoga, the philosophy of yoga tries to embody. And I put all 10, well, of the first two limbs, there's 5 and 5 in each. So I put all 10 in the chat, and I can type up a PDF or whatever to post later. I just haven't had time to do that. But in a nutshell, for the yamas, these are, it's often been defined as like ethical restraints, but that can sometimes feel restrictive. It's more of the things that we try to embody in the way we interact with the world. So the first one being ahimsa, non-harm. Second one, and I forgot it already, Satya, truthfulness. Then we have the third, oh, there's Sonibur. Come on. Then the third, we have Asteya, which is essentially non-stealing. Brahmacharya, which is, it can be defined in many ways, but kind of a nutshell term, moderation or continence. I like to define it as integrity. And then we have Aparigraha, meaning like non-greed, non-hoarding. Then the Niyamas, these are more of our personal observances. So you've got Saucha, cleanliness of mind, body, and spirit. Santosa is contentment. Tapas is discipline or austerity. Svadhyaya is a sense of self-study or self-reflection. And then the last one is Ishvarapranidhana, essentially humility to something greater than you. So being open to, you know, the world is not centered around you, kind of in a nutshell. So that's the first two. We have, between us panelists, we're kind of going to touch on those in a bit more greater detail, and then we'll open it up to a Q&A. If there is something, I mean, I don't want too many interruptions, but if there is something that you need to interject, feel free to unmute yourself and offer that, or kind of maybe offer something up in the chat that we can offer up. But Mindy's going to take us off with Ahimsa.
So Ahimsa is, looking at my notes, nonviolence and compassion for all living beings, thoughtful consideration and awareness of your actions on the lives of others in every situation. Do not be harmful. It also has to do with our duties and responsibilities. Ahimsa implies that in every situation, we should adopt a considerate attitude and do no harm, which throughout the quarantine and all of these recent events in our nation's history is extremely relevant, I think, now. And I thought of it immediately when Sara asked about having a chat and chai. I thought maybe we could talk about yamas and niyamas, because all of the other ones can really be rooted back to this nonviolence, harm and compassion in our daily lives and our practices and everywhere, really.
Yeah, you know, I also like to, when I talk about ahimsa, kind of bring up the concept of non-harm versus non-violence, which is definitely a topic happening in the world today. And without kind of getting too much into a spiral into that, maybe we want to go through like all of our kind of insights and definitions, because everything, like you said, it's going to be rooted back into ahimsa. I know some of the things that Melanie wants to talk about are rooted back in ahimsa. Everything is kind of rooted there, at least in my personal purview. And I know a lot of like deeply studied students of yoga, they kind of agree in that realm that things are rooted in ahimsa. I mean, I could probably talk for an hour on the difference between nonviolence and non-harm, and how they differ and how they are similar. But do you have any thoughts on that, Mindy?
The difference of non-harm and non-violence.
Mm-hmm.
I think non-violence sometimes can mean standing up to violence, standing up to enforce that non-harm. I think if they're connected, but they can be a lot different.
Right, because oftentimes we can get in that space of, yoga is all about love and light and, sunshine and puppy dogs and all of those things, because we only translate it as nonviolence, but you don't necessarily want to be a doormat either, right? So if someone is trying to accost your person or someone that you love, not that I'm condoning violence, but sometimes violence might be necessary to prevent harm to that. Those kind of things. So it definitely gets kind of fuzzy. What are your thoughts, Melanie? I see your brain really spinning.
Well, I think the danger lies in choosing a level of passivity that allows for harm in the world. So I believe that you cannot discount the significance of justice. And that doesn't mean leveling your own justice or deciding to take out your own personal justice on people or on a situation, but to stand idly by is not the practice of ahimsa. Yeah, so I'd say that for me personally, and the reason that I think I do think that there are certain that as we go through these, each of you will probably notice that you gravitate toward one or a handful of them. That's the way that Sara offered this up to us, was to choose the ones that speak to us, and then we can talk about how they're interrelated and how they prop each other up in a way. And there's a Kripalu quote that's by firmly grasping the flower of a single virtue, a person can lift the entire garland of yama and niyama. So to choose that one bead to meditate on, you don't have to take all 10 of these in today and start radically practicing them. You can choose one or two beads to polish, so to speak. So but as far as thinking of what is nonviolence versus what is non-harm, you can also tend to do violence to yourself. So recognizing how are my actions affirmative and helpful and supportive, as opposed to, well, I'm not political, or I don't want to get involved, I don't want to mix in. And so that you're actually just kind of weaseling out of being in a very fraught world and living a very fraught life and dealing with complexity.
And in the long run, then we all suffer because of that.
Right. So you're doing harm to yourself if you're turning yourself inside out to avoid conflict, because that's not what ahimsa is about.
Yeah. And I guess that's kind of what I was getting at, but you're definitely much more eloquent than I am. In that space of, sometimes you do need to stand up and you do need to exert effort and force in the least harmful way. When I was practicing karate, we would talk about the concept of, you try to dissolve the situation before you have to resort to something more aggressive, to something more violent, to something more forceful. But then when trying to dismantle the situation or dissolve, the escalation of a situation doesn't work, then
to some extent, I think what you're talking about is, all of us come into situations with people who want to push us, and who, with or without consciousness, with or without effort and real thoughtfulness about their behaviors and their choices and what they're asking of us, and in some cases demanding of us, they're creating a situation where if we say no, or if we put up a hand and push back, that suddenly, oh, well, you're being violent toward me, or you're being mean, which women probably hear that more often than anybody. You're mean. Why are you being mean? Why are you being so bitchy? And it's no is not violent.
Yeah. Agreed.
Having lived in the space of being a doormat for so long and thinking that I should never say no, and just becoming filled with a resentment that would just seep out. What I thought was doing was the practice of Ahimsa was not. It was not good for me, and it was not good for the people around me either.
Yeah, it never is when you cave to your oppressor, and no matter what the situation is, it's the only person benefiting is the oppressor.
Right.
Not
they don't
you,
have
not
to
not
be
the
aware
people
of
that.
it. I mean, I think I would love to hear, what some of you all think about this idea that I do think intention is important, but recognizing that there's an oppression in the world doesn't require the oppressor to recognize that.
Yeah.
It requires all of us to say, no. I mean, that's what privilege is. Privilege is sitting back and just not recognizing that there's oppression. I just don't see it. Okay, well, you don't have to.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because it's there, it's real. Here's the evidence.
Yeah, Sabrina put in the comments that I think conflict is a natural human construct. So trying to avoid it completely is not healthy. Absolutely.
Sure.
And the concept of physical versus mental, or internal versus external conflict. Yeah, I think that kind of falls into the realm of at least what Melanie was talking about, and maybe Sabrina, you can unmute and share maybe what you are meaning. But like that self-harm versus harm to others, is that what you're meaning kind of by the internal versus external? Yeah, absolutely. Definitely physical harm, mental harm of self and other falls into this category. People who suffer from depression can get into that spiral of internal dialogue that is nothing but self-harm. And that is definitely not the practice of Ahimsa. And so there has to be a fight there, right? To come out of those depressions, there has to be, I mean, it's not a fist fight, but mentally it can get pretty bloody, metaphorically and sometimes literally speaking. When it's something kind of in of the self, not just out in the world. A willingness to fight, absolutely. This need to stand up and fight for yourself, fight for yourself within yourself, and fight for others as well out in the world.
If you feel yourself, torn, then you can consider that you can, and I think this speaks to what Sabrina's comment is, that disruption is a necessary thing. That's what your practice is. Your practice is, you can see it as a disruption of your day, that you step into the mat, that you're forcing yourself, disciplining yourself to take the time to create the disruption, that you're creating stress on your body in order to strengthen it. So in order for systems to change, in order for context to change, in order for narrative to change, there has to be a disruption. You don't read a book with no drama.
Right. Or at least you don't read it for
nobody
very
likes
long.
a character with no arc.
It's true.
Saith the writer.
Yes.
Yeah. Art is disruption. That's the difference between an artist and someone who makes a pretty picture or creates something that is simply pleasing, that is only aesthetic, is the disruption of mental process and emotional process.
Yeah.
We've been talking about the no harm and no violence, but also when I'm listening to you all talk, I'm focusing more on when and I think what's her name, Melanie mentioned in the intention, whether it's there or not, sometimes is irrelevant, because even though you don't intend to harm somebody, it may end up being that, that you end up harming somebody. Like with me doing like my steps and doing my amends, I can't absolve myself of something where I wronged somebody by creating harm to them in my doing so, and then letting them deal with whatever I told them or I confessed to them, and then me be able to grow, so to speak, because I've made my amends, but at the same time I've created some harm or some chaos in somebody else's life by what I've told them or what I've tried to make amends for. So I guess it's just being mindful of the fact that even though you may have good intentions, that you have to look at what actions you take and the way they're going to be perceived by others, and how that can impact them in a harmful, or it could probably lead to violence too, I guess, if depending on the person, how toxic they may be.
Yeah.
And the response.
That's a really lovely segue toward Satya, toward truthfulness.
Yeah.
So there was I don't know if it's still a thing, but I know when I was about a decade into yoga, then I'm just owning my truth, I'm just being my truth, that was a really popular thing to say. And I remember thinking, that's only using one of the three gates of speech. So the three gates of speech are: is it true? Great. Yeah. Is it kind? Is it necessary? And so, to speak to what you're saying, Saul, it's wonderful that you want to go through the steps, and that the amends is something to work on. But I think you're just spot on about the idea of considering how unburdening yourself can create harm for another person. And so, asking yourself if something's necessary or if something's kind is equally important, and sort of speaks to that relationship between truthfulness to Satya and Ahimsa. That, telling me I look really tired today, while your intention might be to show sympathy, might make me feel like crap. Like, thanks. Yeah, I am tired today. My face is falling off. I feel broken, but thanks for noticing. So just thinking about, what you said is accurate. If somebody looks tired, they look tired, but that might not be what they need to hear. So.
I may be living in my truth, but I must not need be an asshole. That's true, Sabrina. Exactly. Yeah. I mean, it's true, right?
Your truth and my truth are going.
and that's why I've never been a huge fan of the hashtag, and I'm probably gonna, upset a lot of people, but that hashtag sorry not sorry. I'm just living my truth. And it's like, in the wise words of Cordelia, there needs to be something tactful about it. Or I guess that was Giles. She was very tactless. But there needs to be some attribute to truth that is tactful, right? And that's that. Is it kind and is it necessary? Absolutely. What are your thoughts, Mindy, on truthfulness?
I think I often think about what Melanie said about the gates of speech, and I definitely don't practice that perfectly. So it's good to keep in mind. I think that if you tell someone something and it will hurt them and make you feel better, but won't change anything, then say nothing.
Yeah, absolutely. Like our moms used to tell us, if you can't say anything nice, don't say anything at all.
Yes, Thumper. Yeah. Yeah. Well, and there's something to be said for even the demand of truthfulness. The idea, I don't know, everybody has different family stories and family backgrounds, but there are members of my family who feel like you're lying if you haven't told them everything. there's a difference between truth and disclosure. So, you know, having some things that are just mine that, you know, I have to or need to or want to live with and not share is mine. That's my truth, and I can protect it or share it as I see fit. But I'm not lying. I'm not walking around lying to the world by not making announcements. I mean, that would be probably comical sometimes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, there does need to be some level of self-privacy and self-preservation in that regard. I mean, when withholding the truth harms other people, then that's something, right? But then also when offering the truth harms other people, then that's something as well.
Yeah, there's a lot to weigh in there. It's like Ahimsa. These are complex, thought-provoking things that stir the pot, and that's why they're not just. I'm glad everybody got dug today. You know, it's yoga practice, not yoga got it.
Yeah.
And you know, this isn't a checklist of like, well, I got through this one and this one, and so therefore I will now be enlightened, or I cleansed my chakras one at a time and now I'm okay. You're welcome. You know.
Welcome to the glory that is me.
Yeah, I mean, Mindy said it perfectly. I practice these. I think about these a lot, but you know, I'm not perfect in my practice, and perfect practice makes perfect, but practice is the gist.
Yeah.
It takes practice and a time.
Absolutely.
And we fall and fail, but yeah. What if babies fell down and never tried again?
Yeah,
So
we'd all
I
still
like
be on the
that.
floor.
That's one of my favorite images. I bring it up all the time. What if people gave up the first time they tried walking when they fell? All these
Yeah.
adults crawling around on the ground. But yeah, we
all-
have to keep practicing.
In the book of the Four Agreements, one of them is that be impeccable with your word. And I love the way he explains that, in where you don't say things that will end up hurting you in the long run, where it may feel good in the short term, where, you know, you, like Melanie was saying, you look tired today or whatever, where if you talk to somebody in a manner which, even though it's true, but it comes from a place of either trying to be mean, or I forget the word I'm trying to think about right now, but from a place of malice, right? Then it's going to somehow come back and bite you at some point in the future. So when you're trying to be truthful, you also need to be impeccable, where you're saying it for the right reasons. And like you said, you know, there's a reason behind it, and there's kindness behind it, and it's not going to come back and harm you later on by any form taken by either the individual that you were saying it to, by somebody who may have overheard you. It's like right now we're talking about everything going on in the world, especially here with race and riots and violence. And you got to be really careful what you say in front of people, because you never know what their beliefs are. But at the same time, you don't want to censor yourself to the point where you don't feel that you're able to speak your mind, because you may feel that you're going to either alienate somebody or make them get crossways with you. But everything's so raw right now that at the same time, you don't want to open up a wound for somebody and then be stuck with having to repair that relationship because of something you said. So there is a level of truth that can be out there, but at the same time, you know, you got to be, again, mindful with the intent and the ramifications of saying it in mixed company or in company that you don't know what their backgrounds are.
Right. And Sabrina makes a good point that it's that we learn to quit, that it's not how we're created. So this baby on the floor, that if they never get up, you know, they always get up. We do evolve into a fear of failure. So we do learn to quit. And the idea with, you know, being truthful and being impeccable and being non-harmful in the way we engage with the world, it is this we don't want to, which kind of leads into Brahmacharya, we don't want to go so far that we get too rajasic and burn out, right? And then we then default into a quitting state. We want to be able to keep going and keep being truthful and keep sharing and keep extending and keep offering that truth in a place of non-harm with integrity and with positive directive of energy, which is one of the ways I like to define Brahmacharya. A lot of time it's defined as like celibacy, and there's sexual connotations to it, which is very true. But it can also be understood as this redirected, conscious direction of energy, where you put yourself and where you put your thoughts and where you put your studies. That's Brahmacharya. It's referred to the particular stage of life in the Hindu culture of when you're a student. Also an unmarried male who is assumed to be celibate, and that's probably where a lot of the celibacy concepts come from. But the stage of life that it refers to is this stage when you're a student, where you're devoting all of your energy to learning. So if you want to kind of practice Brahmacharya in sort of broad interpretations of that word, it's that directive use of energy. Where do you want to put your energy? Do you want it to get to a point of excess and burnout and therefore quit? Or do you want to kind of find, I mean, there's a time to go hard and go strong, but there's also a time to kind of moderate that energy and that verbal vomit of truth, and because it can become harmful if there is no filter. I don't want people to feel like they have to censor themselves, but at the same time, it goes back to all of this that we've already been talking about. But it's that positive directive of energy.
It's a great place to settle intention into the conversation. Mm-hmm. So Sara and I talked a little bit yesterday, and for me, the word that comes to mind for me is potency. Where can you gather your energies and place them for best potency? Because if you're going to choose action after creating good intention, then you want your action to be potent. You want your truthful words and your kindness to be potent. And you want to think about, how is this going to shape the narrative in the future? What am I doing right now with these lessons and who I am in the world to shape the next step and the next step? So there is intention. Intention isn't just about, well, I'm doing this from a place of good intention. It's about, it's about understanding that there are unintended consequences of your actions.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So
I wrote down. I wrote down a couple of notes, and this is from a book that I've been reading in terms of written by Iyengar, and what he was writing about in terms of energy and directive use of energy. He says, energy is a torrent that can break its banks and dissipate itself in self-destructive ways. And that's what we want to avoid, is the self-destructive ways. And that's what, I was meaning by that kind of rajasic. So there is that intent, that potency that, big things go boom, for all metaphors and literal. Yeah. Avoiding the premature waste of energy through the practice of Brahmacharya. And instead of thinking of it as a practice of repression, we want to think about it as a directed channeling for a more mature and glorious flow, his words, glorious flow, that will come in its own good time. Marifer had mentioned truth in good time, at that appropriate time. So it's kind of like we have to know when to go full Slayer mode and when to just sort of be Scooby mode and research mode and learning mode and evolution mode. And that's all, to me, that's all Brahmacharya, but it's rooted in what is true, what is integral at moment and what is going to produce the least harm for the greatest benefit, right? I don't know. You guys agree with that? Or,
Yeah, no.
or was that just a big like, whoa, okay.
When it's well said, it doesn't need to be repeated by someone else.
Yeah, so that, I think that was the last of the Yama. Yeah,
the Aparigraha. We didn't really touch on Asteya much, on non-stealing, but I think there's a reason that not one of us jumped into that one. So
yeah, I mean, not stealing possessions, not stealing energy, not stealing time. Right. There's a lot to it. Not stealing thoughts, intellectual property. I mean, it could go in numerous directions.
Aparigraha is non-greed. That sounds really practical and, you know, easy enough to grasp, but I think in a world where there's sort of a strange relationship between abundance and scarcity, it's something we encounter and we don't even realize we're banging into it. So meditation and, you know, careful attention to how you're feeling in a moment can help you kind of guide yourself through some of those feelings. It's, to me, the Aparigraha, I chose to talk about Aparigraha because I do suffer with a sense of scarcity sometimes, and it can cause, I tend to be the internal meltdown. It will cause kind of my version of greed is to buy too many groceries. I didn't hoard toilet paper when all this was going on. I hoarded oatmeal. Yeah. So, but I think one of the reasons that this gets my attention and needs my focus is that it often comes from a place of fear, a fear of scarcity. And when you're only focused on a fear of scarcity, you're not even looking for abundance.
Yeah, because all you see
up and kick you in the shins, right? I find that I'll start to focus on the things that are missing, or something's wrong, or something feels empty inside, and I spiral into this weird place of scarcity and never, you know, look up and see the abundance. It's a strange daily struggle. So that's why I chose this one, because it's a place that needs my attention.
Yeah, and even just, I like how you put it as abundance versus scarcity. You know, it is often translated as non-hoarding, not non-greed. We often also associate abundance with greed. Sometimes, you know, that it's or it can be, and I speak to this because of, you know, my issues with, I don't want to seem greedy if I'm being abundant. You know, that's my own guilt.
Yeah.
Bye, Sabrina. Thank you for hopping on. We'll see you soon.
So good to see you.
Yeah, she has to go. Husband and wife stuff, which you know, worthy. But the idea of, if you have an abundance of things, be it money, material goods, friends, love, you know, tangible and intangible things, for some of us, we can feel like we're being greedy if we have those things. So we work to living a more scarce life, and we're afraid of living in scarcity as well.
There's a really bizarre entanglement of worthiness and an internal dialogue of deserving, and it pulls you out of a space of what I've really worked on over the last probably 3 or 4 years is living in a space where nobody else gets a vote. And that doesn't mean I don't care about any of you, and that doesn't mean I don't want to hear your opinion, but in the end, when it comes to me and how I feel about me, I need to not lead my life with a jury of my peers deciding, you know, whether I'm okay or not, whether I'm good or not, whether I deserve leniency in my life, or whether I deserve a prison sentence in my life, or whatever. You know, I think on a meta level, on a bigger cultural level, we live in a society that has villainized poverty. We live in which I find to be a huge irony, because we also have at least a Judeo-Christian tradition where poverty should be esteemed. So while we say that poverty should be esteemed, we also villainize and criminalize poor people and assume that they're bad, or that they've done something wrong, or that they deserve that life, they haven't worked hard, or that the people who have abundance, that it's not that they're greedy, it's that they worked hard for it. And that isn't always true.
It's not always true. And that's what we hear a lot about is the people with excess abundance, especially excess monetary wealth.
Yeah, that they worked for it.
That they worked for it, or that they are also inherently evil because of it.
Sure. Right. Yeah.
You know,
and all of it's more complex than that.
all of it's more complex, right? And especially in the yoga world, that it's like, oh, if you have money, then you're not living the yogic life. If you enjoy material goods, then you're not living the yogic life. And all of those kind of ways that we control the feelings of other people, or attempt to control the feelings of other people, you know, for whatever that source is, or whatever that reason is. But yeah, you know, we can have abundance in certain realms and scarcity in other realms. Like, I want to be abundant in love and scarce in hate. and I want to have an abundance of a roof over my head and not have to worry about, paying my bills and being able to buy groceries. And I want a scarcity of fear of being accosted. And I want everybody to have that. I want them to have abundance in those realms, and scarcity in fear for their lives for whatever reason, whether the color of their skin or the sex organs that they, have within their physical person. Whatever the reason, I want people to be scarce in that fear. I don't want them to have it. I want them to be abundant in acceptance and tolerance and welcoming, not tolerance. That I think gives a bad connotation as well. Like, we're tolerant of you. An abundance of welcoming into the human fold. We are all human. Sorry, I'll get off that little soapbox. But yeah, abundance and scarcity and non-hoarding, non-greed. I want to hoard my friends close to me because I don't want to be alone. But I am also willing to share them with other people, except for maybe Melanie. Kidding. I'm sharing her all with you guys.
Just this once.
Just this once.
What about you, Mindy? What do you think about that? We're speaking of hoarding. We're screen
hoarding the time.
Well, I am not as eloquent as you two, but I will say that it's hard when growing up, if sometimes we didn't have everything that we needed. So I had this like hoarding tendency, like anything I got, I struggle with not just keeping it. Well, I don't know if there's going to be more. I don't know if there's going to be more. I need to eat that now, because will there be more later? And then when things started to look up, there came a sense of guilt with that. I have it, other people don't. And it took a long time to shift. I can share. I have enough to share. I'll choose to be grateful. The extra, I don't need to hold so close. I can help others candles burn brighter. It's not going to blow out mine in every sense of physical, emotional, all areas.
Yeah. And speaking of like candles burning bright, that segues into tapas, which is the next one on the chosen list. I mean, there are others that shift us into the Niyamas. That is the concept of personal observances. I mean, we've kind of been speaking to personal observances even within the Yamas, right? Like how we treat other people, but it also can be reflected back upon us. Saucha being cleanliness, not only just taking a shower and getting your physical body clean, but eating clean things to keep your inner workings as clean and healthy as possible, as well as the thoughts in your mind, kind of cleaning cleaning them up as well. You're not responsible for the thoughts that you have, but you are responsible for the way you react to them and the way and the thoughts you choose to put out into the world. Those kind of things. And then the second one, number 2, is always like the hard one for me. Santosa. I don't know why. It's like one of my favorites. Santosa, contentment, not necessarily confusing that with happiness. Contentment being a state of, no matter how horrible things are, that your foundation is not going to be chiseled away. Like the house may burn down, but the foundation is still there. You're going to be able to build up again, as opposed to, well, my life sucks, when all things are kind of, I'm sorry, for lack of a better word, shitty. Sorry, I don't usually curse very often, so I always have a pause right before I do. When things are kind of in the worst light, there is that sense of contentment that this won't shake me at my core being. It may shake me just outside of that, enough to fuel the fire to kind of go forth and make change, whether that's internal change, micro sphere change in your tiny world, or out into the big macro world. But a contentment that you are who you are, and no one, no matter what they give you or take away from you, tangibly speaking, can change that. Which leads us into tapas, unless either of you ladies want to speak to Saucha or Santosa. Okay, Mindy, do you want to give us some insight into that fire?
Yes. So tapas, it's been a big, since we've all been home, it's been a really, I've been thinking about it a lot and having to practice it a lot. Sabrina says that when she wakes up, she eats her frog. So that's doing the first thing, the thing she's least looking forward to doing. And it's easy to do it and it's easy not to do it. So it's what gets me on my mat when I'm tired. I easily could just stay in bed. I'm not a morning person. I could lay in bed. So it's what gets me out of bed. It's working towards my goals, and it's planning my classes before I teach, so I know what I'm doing, even though I really want to paint a wall in the house. I have nowhere to go. It's burning up all the desires that stand in our way of the goals, is what I have pulled from Sarah's manual about tapas. And so it can be paying attention to what you eat, your posture, your attention to your breathing. Those are all tapas.
Yeah, that discipline, that austerity, that in the teacher training, I often, when I talk about tapas, I refer to that Rumi poem from Chickpea to Cook, or Chickpea to Cook, where the cook is the teacher, and he's going to turn this chickpea into something soft and mushy that you can eat, or that someone can eat and then be nourished from, and then that person becomes the next teacher, and that was formerly the chickpea. Obviously, Rumi just said it way more better than I did just now. But essentially, yeah, we have to go through the process of boiling, of fire, of stress on the body. Melanie mentioned this earlier, that you put your physical body under stress in order to strengthen it, to be kind to it, in terms of non-harm, even though it is something that can cause sometimes mental suffering of, you don't want to get out of bed and you want, whatever, varying degrees of mental suffering. But yeah, you have to kind of put your feet to the fire in that regard, and do it, and be disciplined in those actions, whether it is making sure you sit up tall, or making sure you get out of bed and do your practice, or making sure that you stand up for people who are oppressed, and not letting yourself burn out or become, disenchanted by it because you don't see immediate change. Part of Brahmacharya is also patience, right? To wait for it. A chickpea doesn't, if you've ever made beans from scratch, they don't cook in 5 minutes like they do in a can, because they've already been on the stove boiling for 2 hours, 2 to 6 hours, depending on if you pre-soak or not, for the bean makers in the house. So it takes some time, right? If you're going to make hummus from scratch, you got to start your beans in the morning to have it by dinner. There's patience involved. If you're making bread, sometimes certain recipes take days. When we're talking about mass change across humanity, that can take decades, if not centuries. So there's an element of patience. People want to get their leg behind their head in their practice, and it takes more than a weekend workshop to make it happen. Things like that, or they want to stand on their head or something. I'm working a lot of like behind the head stuff, so that's kind of where I'm at these days. Yeah, I don't know. What do you think, Melanie?
Well, I think you're speaking to the idea that there's always work to be done. Mm-hmm. But you're here, you're above ground. You might as well do a little work.
Yeah.
Nobody likes no character arc. It's
true, right? And
just saying the same thing over and over again, different ways.
Because it's all interrelated, right? It's all interwoven. In all of this, the business stuff that I learn and listen to and read and things like that, they talk about the grind. And that not everybody's cut out for entrepreneurship and these kind of things. And it's true, because people often are amazed when I say, oh yeah, I had an 80-hour work week. And they're like, but don't you own a yoga studio? Like, don't you just teach yoga? And I'm like, yeah, but there's all the behind the scenes. It took me 10 years to get here, to get to this point that the studio could survive a 90-day closure. I couldn't have done that if we had just opened after, if this had happened a few months after opening, things like that. It takes time, and you have to keep getting back up. And that's where the discipline is, right? Is the getting back up part, as opposed to just like, well, that didn't work, I'm just going to crawl around for the rest of my life.
Roll
around for the rest of my life.
That's where the flat earthing comes from, right? Everything's low.
Apparently. Just don't go sailing.
There's the edge of the counter.
Yeah. Oh man, I miss Marley. Anyways.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so to finish up, you wanted Melanie to talk about, unless there's anything you wanted to add, Mindy, for tapas. I mean, that one's pretty straightforward.
Yeah.
But
yeah, I know we don't want to go to the point where people don't have a chance to jump in.
Yeah. So I want to finish up with the Svadhyaya.
Svadhyaya, in the simplest, notion, is self-reflection, and the fact that you all are here, you're practicing Svadhyaya. So I did have a Rumi quote for that one that I really like. Surprise, surprise. Maybe you are searching among branches for what only appears in roots. So Svadhyaya is, allowing yourself below the surface. Mm-hmm. Tapas and self-discipline is seeing that behind the simple Facebook post of the smiley yogi is a shit ton of work. Behind but you just run a yoga studio is 80 hours a week. Yeah. So yeah, watch drag queens. That explains everything. Nothing is as simple, right? All that pretty shiny, there's all this other stuff underneath. And
yeah, and then there's a lot of polishing, whether it's in your practice or in your mental health or in your ability to engage with others. There's a lot of polishing. Even the people that we're close to, we can say the wrong thing. Saul was kind of alluding to this, that you may say something that you have to mend up later, not amend, but mend later if you phrase it the wrong way, or what have you, and end up hurting someone's feelings. And it's all self-reflection, because if you say something and you're completely unaware that you hurt their feelings, or you're aware and you don't care, are you turning that mirror back to face you, or are you just kind of putting it out to the world to put the responsibility of self-awareness on other people, and not really worrying about your own personal growth and that kind of thing?
Yeah, like a sorry not sorry situation.
Yeah, which is there you go,
their favorite hashtag. Yeah. Yeah. Well, and in that self-reflection and in what you're saying about polishing, you can run back to Ahimsa and Satya and think about, is it self-polishing or self-punishing? Is it, are you telling yourself a true narrative about yourself? When you get in there, are you cleaning out cobwebs and detritus, or are you are you building a negative space and a narrative that harms you? And it's hard. It's hard not to.
It is. It's really hard. Mental health and growth and personal evolution is never easy. Evolution, biologically speaking, is never easy. We often, I want to leave it open to questions. I will get up on this,
Yeah.
it's not boom that everybody thinks. It takes millennia. Sorry, I've been reading a pop science book. I mean, amongst like 10 others that I'm reading. So just finished the chapter on viruses. Yeah. All right. You can unmute yourselves if you have questions or commentary. Like I want to leave it open for the next 10 minutes. What's up, Sonneberg?
Nothing much. I really liked how today's topic was about Ahimsa, non-harm and non-violence. And because it's so prevalent right now.
Absolutely.
And I'm really glad that we didn't tackle it. I'm glad that we had an open discussion about it. So that's what I think we need, is more communication. And in the next 2 weeks, I'm going to start a facilitator track course in nonviolent communication.
Excellent.
Yeah, where people come in and you empathize with them. You don't judge them. You say, I understand what you're going through. You don't compare yourself, but it's not sympathy and it's not judgment, but it's empathy. And that's what we need. That is exactly what we need right now.
Agreed. Yeah. What else? I can keep rambling if no one else has any questions, but Saul, you got something?
Yeah, oh shit. For me, just listening to you all and everything we've discussed today, I'm kind of like what Mindy said about her growing up. I don't think that I hoard, but I grew up with having nothing. And like, it was always feast or famine because my grandfather was a bricklayer. So if he was working, building a school, we'd have money for 6 months or however long it took to build the school. And then he may be unemployed for 3 months at a time or whatever, or he may just jump to another project, whatever. But so now it's these beliefs that I grew up with that I'm still working through to try and, correct. I don't want to say fix, but correct, because I still go and I buy 30 razors because I may get laid off next week, I'm always thinking that I always have that in the back of my head that there may be some famine in the near future. So I better make sure that I have everything, but it's not out of greed or anything else other than just the way I was raised. Now, that being said, I do, now that I'm working on myself, understand that is an unrealistic belief. So I'm working at it. I actually have stuff all over my house because I'm trying to minimalize. I have so much stuff that I don't need that I'm donating. But all these concepts that I'm learning, or that I've learned through your class and through the teacher training, has really given me so much insight as to how all these, like we've been discussing, feed into each other, but also give you that blueprint that if you're willing to do the work and stay consistent, then you will gain that benefit of the work.
And the key is the work, right? It's doing that work, no matter what it is,
Right.
Towards betterment, obviously. Like, you don't want to use your powers for evil. So doing the work for the good of the self, the good of the community. But work has to be done, and it starts with ourselves. And you recognize, because you've done that self-reflection, you recognize, or at least you're continuing to do the work of self-reflection. You recognize those fears and you're working on them. You recognize the steps in your recovery and you're working on them. You recognize how your steps affect other people. You're very aware of that. That was very obvious during training, that you're aware of how your steps affect other people and you're very cognizant of it, and considerate of it.
Thank you.
For sure. Yeah. Yeah. So, I mean, it's all about the self-awareness, and it all comes back to truth, or ahimsa, non-harm, in my opinion, and kind of tethered with truth, right? Because you have to find out what is true in order to be non-harmful, or truly non-harmful. I don't know. Do Melanie and Mindy, do you guys want to say anything closing wise to wrap this up? Or do we just want to say
thanks to everybody for hopping on and trying this out again. I hope this feels like it went more smoothly than, I hope that you enjoyed having a topic to focus on.
Yeah, and if you guys want to submit more topics, we'd like to maybe do this once a month. So you've got time to get in a topic, or if something comes to you like mid-month, come early July, we'll try and figure out another time to do this. Saturday afternoons seem to work, but we'll see. Yeah, what about you, Mindy?
Thank you for coming on. I really enjoyed speaking to you, and I hope to get to do it again.
Yeah. All right. Well, thanks everyone. And thanks everyone who joined on the Zoom, and if you joined on the YouTube live stream, or if you're watching this later, thanks for hanging out with us. All right. Bye, guys.
Bye.
Bye.